The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Aldemir Palace as Prince Alexander made his way through the grand corridors. The young prince had always possessed a keen eye for detail and an even keener sense of when something was amiss in his father's court. Today, that familiar feeling of unease settled in his stomach like a stone. Lady Cordelia Whitmore, his stepmother of 3 years, swept past him in the hallway wearing her signature emerald velvet gown and that practiced smile she reserved for public appearances. She barely acknowledged his presence with a curt nod, her attention focused entirely on the rolled parchment clutched in her jeweled fingers. "Good morning, Your Highness," she said, her voice carrying that musical quality that had initially charmed King Edmund into marriage. "I trust you slept well?" Alexander studied her face carefully. Something flickered behind her green eyes, something that looked suspiciously like triumph mixed with nervousness. "Well enough, Lady Cordelia. You seem rather energetic this morning." She laughed, a sound like silver bells that somehow managed to ring false in the vast hallway. "Oh, it's nothing of importance. Just some correspondence from my dear cousin in the Northern Territories. Family matters, you understand." The prince nodded politely, but his curiosity was thoroughly piqued. Lady Cordelia rarely mentioned family, claiming to be the last of her noble line, a tragic backstory that had earned her considerable sympathy from the court, and, more importantly, from his grieving father. The timing of her appearance in their lives, just months after Queen Isabella's death, had always struck Alexander as remarkably convenient. As she glided away toward the throne room, Alexander noticed she dropped something, a small slip of parchment that had apparently been tucked within the larger document. He waited until she disappeared around the corner before retrieving it. The fragment contained only a few words in an unfamiliar handwriting. "Payment received as agreed. Maintain the deception until—" The rest was torn away, but those few words sent a chill down Alexander's spine. He tucked the fragment into his jacket and followed the path Lady Cordelia had taken. The throne room buzzed with the usual morning activity. Courtiers clustered in small groups, discussing everything from trade agreements to the latest scandals. King Edmund sat upon his throne, looking older than his 50 years, while Lady Cordelia stood at his side with that same triumphant gleam in her eyes. "My dear subjects," the king announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "Lady Cordelia has received wonderful news from the Northern Territories. It seems there has been a significant development regarding her family's ancient claims to those lands." Alexander positioned himself near a marble pillar where he could observe without being obvious. Several court members leaned forward with interest. Land claims meant potential wealth and influence. Lady Cordelia stepped forward, unrolling the parchment with theatrical flourish. "Your Majesty, esteemed members of the court, I am pleased to announce that the Northern Council has officially recognized my family's hereditary claim to the Ironwood estates. These lands, worth approximately 50,000 gold sovereigns annually, have been restored to their rightful heir." Murmurs of impressed congratulations rippled through the assembled nobles. Such wealth would make Lady Cordelia one of the most influential landowners in the kingdom, second only to the royal family itself. But Alexander frowned. Something about her announcement didn't align with what he knew of Northern Territory law. During his education, he had studied the complex feudal systems of their neighboring regions extensively. The Ironwood estates, if he remembered correctly, had been dissolved and redistributed among several families nearly a century ago after a major dispute. The idea that they could be simply restored to a single heir seemed highly unlikely. "This is indeed wonderful news," King Edmund said, beaming at his wife. "Tell us, my dear, what proof did the Northern Council require to validate your claim?" Lady Cordelia's smile never wavered, but Alexander caught the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. Oh, the usual documentation, Your Majesty. Ancient family records, genealogical charts, witness testimonies. All quite standard, really. And I assume you have copies of these documents here at court? Asked Lord Chancellor Morrison, a meticulous man who rarely missed important details. Naturally, Lady Cordelia replied smoothly, though they are written in the old northern dialect, which few here would be able to read. The Council provided this summary document in our common tongue for easier understanding. Alexander's frown deepened. He had studied the old northern dialect extensively and was, in fact, quite fluent in it. His tutors had insisted that a future king should be able to communicate with all his potential subjects and allies. Yet Lady Cordelia seemed eager to dismiss the possibility of anyone actually examining the original documents. Sir Marcus Blackwood, one of the kingdom's most respected legal advisers, stepped forward. Your Ladyship, forgive my professional curiosity, but might I ask which specific council members signed off on this decision? I have colleagues in the Northern Territories who keep me informed of major land redistributions. For the first time, Lady Cordelia's composure showed a crack. Her hand gripped the parchment slightly tighter, and Alexander noticed a bead of perspiration forming at her temple despite the cool morning air. The signatures are all there, Sir Marcus, she said, her voice carrying a subtle edge. 3 council members, as required by Northern law, though I must say I find it rather odd that anyone would question such good fortune. Oh, I mean no disrespect, Your Ladyship, Sir Marcus replied with a diplomatic bow. I simply find myself curious about the timing. You see, I received correspondence from the Northern Territories just last week, and there was no mention of any major land disputes being resolved. The throne room fell silent except for the distant sound of mourning birds outside the tall windows. Alexander watched as Lady Cordelia's knuckles went white around the parchment. The fragment in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest. Perhaps your correspondent simply hadn't been informed yet, she suggested, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. King Edmund, who had been listening with growing interest, leaned forward on his throne. Cordelia, darling, might we examine this document more closely? Such a significant addition to our family's holdings should be properly documented in our royal archives. Of course, Your Majesty, she replied, though Alexander noticed she made no move to actually hand over the parchment. Perhaps after this morning's session we could review it in private. But Sir Marcus had already produced a magnifying lens from his robes, the same tool he used to authenticate important documents. If I may, Your Majesty, a quick verification now might save time later. These Northern Territory documents have very specific characteristics that make them easy to authenticate. Alexander felt a surge of anticipation mixed with dread. He loved his father dearly and hated to see him potentially being deceived, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Lady Cordelia's carefully constructed story was about to crumble. Very well, King Edmund declared. Let us examine this document together. After all, transparency in such matters serves the crown well. Lady Cordelia's face went pale beneath her carefully applied cosmetics. She glanced around the throne room as if looking for an escape route, but found herself surrounded by expectant faces. The moment of truth was approaching, and Alexander could see her calculating whether to continue the charade or attempt some kind of retreat. The prince held his breath, his hand unconsciously touching the fragment in his pocket. Whatever happened next would forever change the dynamics of their court, and possibly expose secrets that went far deeper than a simple land claim. Lady Cordelia reluctantly extended the parchment toward Sir Marcus, her movements slow and deliberate, as if hoping some miraculous intervention might spare her from scrutiny. The legal advisor accepted the document with practiced care, holding it up to catch the morning light streaming through the throne room's stained glass windows. Alexander watched with growing fascination as Sir Marcus's expression shifted from professional interest to puzzled confusion, and finally to barely concealed alarm. The older man's eyes darted between the document and Lady Cordelia's increasingly pale face. "Your ladyship," Sir Marcus began carefully, adjusting his spectacles, "might I ask when exactly you received this correspondence?" "Yesterday evening," she replied, though her voice had lost much of its earlier musical quality. "A courier arrived just before sunset." Sir Marcus nodded slowly, then turned to address the assembled court. "Your Majesty, esteemed colleagues, I'm afraid there are several irregularities with this document that require immediate attention." A collective intake of breath rippled through the throne room. King Edmund straightened in his throne, his jovial expression replaced by the stern countenance of a ruler who had dealt with his share of deception over the years. "Please elaborate, Sir Marcus," the king commanded. The legal advisor moved closer to the throne so that everyone could observe his examination. "First, the parchment itself is incorrect. Northern Territory official documents are traditionally written on a specific type of vellum made from northern elk hide. This appears to be common sheepskin, readily available in any market." Alexander watched as Lady Cordelia's hand fluttered to her throat, fingering the emerald necklace that had supposedly been a family heirloom. Her breathing had become noticeably shallow. "Furthermore," Sir Marcus continued, "the seal affixed to this document bears the crest of the Northern Council, but the wax is far too fresh. Northern official seals use a particular blue-tinted wax that darkens to deep indigo within hours of application. This seal appears to have been made sometime this morning." Lady Cordelia opened her mouth as if to protest, but no words emerged. Several courtiers began whispering among themselves, their voices creating a low buzz of excitement and scandal. Lord Chancellor Morrison stepped forward, his shrewd eyes fixed on Lady Cordelia. "Sir Marcus, might you examine the language of the document itself?" "Indeed," Sir Marcus replied, returning his attention to the parchment. "The northern dialect used here contains several grammatical errors that no official scribe would make. Moreover, 2 of the 3 supposed council members whose signatures appear on this document—" He paused dramatically. "Well, Lord Aldrich of Ravenshollow died 6 months ago, and Duchess Evangeline of Northmoor retired from the council last spring." The whispers in the throne room grew louder. Alexander found himself gripping the marble pillar as the full scope of Lady Cordelia's deception began to unfold. His stepmother stood frozen in the center of attention, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "There must be some mistake," she managed to say, though her voice trembled. "Perhaps the courier brought the wrong document, or—" "Your ladyship," interrupted Sir Marcus gently but firmly, "there is one more matter. The 3rd signature on this document belongs to Master Edwin Thornfield, who is indeed a current council member. However, I received a letter from Master Thornfield just 3 days ago, and I can assure you this signature bears no resemblance to his actual handwriting." King Edmund rose from his throne, his face grave. "Cordelia, these are serious accusations. False claims to foreign lands could constitute fraud against the crown. Have you anything to say in your defense?" Lady Cordelia's composure finally cracked completely. Her hands shook as she looked around the throne room, finding no friendly faces among the assembled nobles. There must be an explanation. Perhaps someone has deliberately sabotaged the document to make me appear—" "Your ladyship," called out a new voice from the back of the throne room. Everyone turned to see Master Geoffrey, the royal courier coordinator, striding forward with a leather satchel in his hands. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I can shed some light on this matter." Alexander felt his heart racing. Master Geoffrey was known throughout the court for his meticulous record-keeping and absolute honesty. If he had information relevant to Lady Cordelia's claims, it would be unquestionable. "Your Majesty," Master Geoffrey said, bowing deeply before turning to address Lady Cordelia, I have here the complete records of all couriers who have arrived at Aldemir Palace in the past week. Yesterday evening, only 2 couriers reached our gates, one bringing grain reports from the eastern provinces, and another delivering medical supplies requested by our court physician. The silence in the throne room was deafening. Lady Cordelia's face had gone from pale to ashen, and Alexander noticed her swaying slightly as if she might faint. No courier from the northern territories has arrived at this palace in over 3 weeks, Master Geoffrey continued. In fact, the last correspondence we received from that region was a routine trade report that contained no mention of any land disputes or resolutions. King Edmund's expression hardened further. Cordelia, it would seem that not only is your document fraudulent, but your entire story about how you received it is equally false. Alexander watched as his stepmother's carefully constructed facade finally collapsed entirely. Tears began flowing down her cheeks, smearing the cosmetics she had so carefully applied that morning. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I can explain everything. I never meant for it to go this far." Prince Alexander felt a mix of vindication and pity. He had sensed something was wrong about Lady Cordelia from the beginning, but seeing her complete breakdown in front of the entire court was more dramatic than he had ever anticipated. The fragment of parchment in his pocket suddenly felt significant in an entirely new way. Lord Chancellor Morrison approached Lady Cordelia with surprising gentleness. "Your ladyship, these are grave matters that require complete honesty. If you have indeed fabricated this entire claim, it would be wise to confess fully rather than allow us to uncover each deception individually." Lady Cordelia collapsed into a nearby chair, her elegant composure replaced by the raw desperation of someone whose world was crumbling around her. "I needed the money," she sobbed. "My debts. They were threatening to expose everything." "What debts?" King Edmund demanded, his voice carrying the authority of a monarch who had discovered betrayal in his own household. "Gambling debts, Your Majesty, accumulated over years before our marriage. I thought that marrying into the royal family would solve everything, that I could find a way to pay them back quietly. But they kept demanding more, and when I couldn't provide it..." Alexander felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The mysterious correspondences, the urgent meetings with unfamiliar visitors, the expensive gifts that Lady Cordelia claimed came from grateful subjects. It was all starting to make sense. "They threatened to reveal my true background," she continued through her tears. "I am not Lady Cordelia Whitmore of the noble northern families. I am Cordelia Mills, daughter of a tavern keeper from the southern markets. Everything about my identity, my family history, my supposed noble lineage, all of it was carefully crafted to catch the attention of a grieving widower." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled court. Several of the noble ladies gasped audibly, while the men exchanged dark looks of understanding. The implications of such elaborate deception went far beyond simple fraud. King Edmund sank back onto his throne as if the weight of this betrayal had physically struck him. "Our entire marriage was built upon lies." "Your Majesty," Lady Cordelia pleaded, falling to her knees before the throne, "my feelings for you became genuine. I never expected to actually care for you, but I do. That part was never false." Alexander felt a strange mixture of anger and sympathy watching his father process this devastating revelation. The king had truly loved this woman, had seen her as a companion to help ease the loneliness following his first wife's death. The betrayal was complete and heartbreaking. But even as the drama unfolded before him, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more secrets to be uncovered. The fragment in his pocket mentioned payments and maintaining deception, suggesting that Lady Cordelia's schemes were part of something even larger than personal debt. As Lady Cordelia knelt before the throne in her confession of deception, Alexander felt the weight of the paper fragment in his pocket. The pieces were falling into place, but he suspected there was still more to uncover. His stepmother's breakdown seemed almost too convenient, too perfectly timed to end the investigation before deeper truths could emerge. "Your Majesty," Alexander said, stepping forward from his position near the pillar, "if I may, I believe there are additional matters that require investigation." King Edmund looked at his son with weary eyes. "Alexander, I think we have heard quite enough revelations for one morning. Father, with respect, I don't believe Lady Cordelia's schemes were entirely her own design." Alexander reached into his jacket and withdrew the fragment of parchment he had found. "This fell from her documents this morning." Lady Cordelia's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face now showing genuine terror rather than mere embarrassment. "That is nothing, just a personal note of no importance." Sir Marcus accepted the fragment from Alexander and examined it carefully. "Your Majesty, this appears to reference payments and maintaining deception. The handwriting does not match Lady Cordelia's." "Read it aloud," King Edmund commanded, his voice carrying the steel of a monarch who had reached the limit of his patience with lies. Sir Marcus cleared his throat. The visible text reads, "Payment received as agreed. Maintain the deception until—" The remainder is torn away. Lord Chancellor Morrison's expression grew grave. "This suggests a conspiracy involving payment for Lady Cordelia's deceptions. Your Majesty, we may be dealing with something far more serious than personal fraud." Alexander watched as Lady Cordelia seemed to shrink further into herself. "Stepmother," he said, using the formal title with deliberate emphasis, "who was paying you to maintain deceptions, and what was supposed to happen when the deception ended?" "I cannot tell you," she whispered. "They will kill me if I speak." The throne room erupted in alarmed murmurs. The idea that foreign agents or conspirators might be operating within the royal court sent ripples of fear through the assembled nobles. King Edmund stood once more, his bearing now that of a warrior king rather than a grieving husband. "Cordelia, if you are indeed in danger, the crown can provide protection, but you must tell us everything." Before Lady Cordelia could respond, the great doors of the throne room burst open. Captain Aldrich of the Royal Guard strode in, followed by 2 guards escorting a struggling man in merchant's clothing. "Your Majesty," Captain Aldrich announced, "we apprehended this individual attempting to flee the palace grounds. He was carrying documents that mention Lady Cordelia and substantial sums of money." Alexander felt a surge of anticipation. The final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place. The captured man was pushed forward, his face showing the desperate calculation of someone whose careful plans had collapsed. "Your Majesty, I am merely a merchant conducting legitimate business." "What business?" Sir Marcus demanded, accepting a leather pouch from Captain Aldrich. He opened it and withdrew several documents, his eyebrows rising as he read. "These are contracts," Sir Marcus announced to the court, "detailing payments to Lady Cordelia for specific services. According to these documents, she was being compensated for providing detailed information about palace security, court schedules, and—" His voice grew alarmed. "The king's daily routines and personal habits." The implications hit the throne room like a thunderbolt. This wasn't simply about gambling debts or false identities. Lady Cordelia had been systematically gathering intelligence that could be used against the royal family. King Edmund's face darkened with a fury that Alexander had rarely seen. "Assassination intelligence," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You were mapping my vulnerabilities for killers." Lady Cordelia finally broke completely. "No," she screamed. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. They told me they only wanted information for business advantages, to know when important trade discussions were happening. I never believed they would actually—" "Who are they?" Alexander demanded, stepping closer. Who was paying you? The captured merchant tried to edge away from the guards, but Captain Aldrich's men held him firmly. Under pressure, his defiance crumbled. "The Confederation of Eastern Merchants," he blurted out. "They wanted to destabilize the kingdom's trade policies by removing certain obstacles to their expansion." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. The Eastern Confederation had been pushing for increased influence in their kingdom for years, but their requests had been consistently denied due to their aggressive business practices and suspected criminal connections. "They planned to assassinate the king," Lord Chancellor Morrison stated with horrifying clarity, "and Lady Cordelia was providing the intelligence necessary to plan such an attempt." "I thought it was just information gathering," Lady Cordelia sobbed. "When they started asking about personal security and daily routines, I began to suspect, but they threatened to expose everything. They said they would tell the king about my true identity and my debts. I was trapped." Sir Marcus continued examining the documents from the merchant's pouch. According to these contracts, the final payment was contingent upon successful completion of the primary objective, scheduled for next week during the Harvest Festival, when palace security would be focused on the public celebrations. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. The Harvest Festival was the kingdom's most important annual celebration, when the royal family would make public appearances throughout the day. It would have provided perfect opportunities for assassins to strike. "But today's land claim deception," Alexander said, pieces clicking together. "Was that meant to distract from the investigation?" The merchant's face confirmed Alexander's theory. The Confederation thought that a financial scandal would focus attention away from security concerns. They wanted the court to be preoccupied with Lady Cordelia's supposed good fortune rather than examining her other activities. Lady Cordelia looked up at King Edmund with desperate pleading in her eyes. "Your Majesty, when I realized what they truly intended, I couldn't go through with it. That's why I made the land claims so obviously false. I wanted to be caught. I wanted the investigation to happen so that you would discover the truth before they killed me," King Edmund finished grimly. Alexander suddenly found himself fighting back an unexpected urge to laugh. The absurdity of the entire situation was overwhelming. His stepmother had committed an elaborate fraud in order to get caught, thereby saving his father's life by exposing an assassination plot. The sheer complexity of the deception that had ultimately defeated itself was almost comical. "Your Majesty," Captain Aldrich reported, "our guards have secured the rooms Lady Cordelia has been using. We've found additional correspondence with detailed maps of the palace, schedules of guard rotations, and—" He paused, looking grim. "A list of festival events with specific timings where the royal family would be most vulnerable." The merchant's shoulders sagged in complete defeat. "The plan is ruined now. The Confederation will abandon any further attempts." "On the contrary," King Edmund said with dangerous calm, "they will face immediate consequences. Captain Aldrich, prepare diplomatic communications to the Eastern Confederation. They will provide full details of this conspiracy and surrender all involved parties, or they will face siege from our armies." Alexander watched the proceedings with a mixture of admiration for his father's decisive leadership and amusement at how spectacularly the conspiracy had backfired. Lady Cordelia's attempt to save herself through deception had inadvertently saved the kingdom from a serious threat. "And what of Lady Cordelia?" Lord Chancellor Morrison asked. King Edmund looked down at his wife, his expression unreadable. "She will face charges for fraud and conspiracy, but her cooperation in exposing this plot will be noted. The courts will decide her fate." As guards moved to escort both Lady Cordelia and the merchant away, she turned back toward the throne. "Your Majesty, I know I have no right to ask anything, but please believe that my regret is genuine. I never wanted anyone to be hurt." King Edmund nodded slowly. "I believe you, Cordelia. That knowledge may be the only thing that saves your life. As the dramatic morning finally concluded and the throne room began to empty, Alexander remained near his father's throne. The irony of the entire situation finally overcame him, and he could no longer suppress his amusement. A small chuckle escaped, growing into genuine laughter. "Alexander," King Edmund said with mild reproach, "I hardly think this situation calls for humor." "Forgive me, father," Alexander replied, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "But the sheer absurdity of it all. A woman commits fraud to get caught in order to prevent herself from helping assassins kill you. And the conspiracy was undone by a forged document so obviously false that a child could have spotted the deception." King Edmund considered this for a moment, then his own mouth twitched with suppressed amusement. "When you put it that way, son, I suppose there is a certain ridiculous elegance to how completely their plan collapsed." "Sometimes," Alexander observed, "the most elaborate deceptions are defeated by their own complexity." Lady Cordelia's lies became so tangled that the only way out was to create an even bigger lie that would force the truth into the open. As father and son walked together from the throne room, Alexander reflected on the morning's events. The kingdom was safer, a conspiracy had been exposed, and justice would be served. Sometimes, he thought with lingering amusement, the most serious threats were defeated in the most unexpected ways. The great deception had indeed unraveled before the entire court, just as the title of this strange tale suggested, and Alexander's laughter, born from relief and the absurd irony of it all, had been impossible to hold back as he watched the most convoluted conspiracy he had ever encountered defeat itself through its own elaborate machinations.